Chapter 2. Of course, County Sheriff Orward Bud Barnum wasn't in when Joe called the dispatch center in Saddle String. According to the dispatcher, a chain-smoking conspiracy buff named Wendy, neither was Deputy McGlanahan. Both, she said, had responded to an emergency that morning in a Forest Service campground in the mountains. Some campers reported seeing a wounded man on horseback straight through their camp last night, Wendy told Joe. They said the suspect allegedly rode his horse right through their camp while displaying a weapon and threatening the campers with said weapon. Joe could tell that Wendy loved the situation, loved being in the center of the action, loved telling Joe about it, loved saying things like allegedly and said weapon. She did not get a chance to use those words often in 12 Sleep County. I called out the entire sheriff's office of both emergency and medical vehicles at 7:12 a.m. this morning to respond. Did you get a description of the man on horseback? Joe asked. Wendy paused on the telephone, then read from the report. Late 30s, wearing a beard, bloody shirt, big man, crazy eyes, they said. The suspect was allegedly swinging some kind of plastic box or cooler around. Joe leaned his chair back so he could see out of the small room near the front door that served as his office. Both girls were lined up at the back window looking out. Mary Beth hovered behind them, trying to draw their attention away by rattling a box of pretzels, the same way she would shake dog biscuits at Maxine to get her to come into the house. Why wasn't I called? Joe inquired calmly. I live on the Bighorn Road. There was no response. Finally, I never even thought about it. Joe recalled what Mary Beth had said about Vern Dunnigan, but said nothing. Sheriff Barnum didn't mention it either when he said defensively. The injured man was displaying a threatening weapon with one hand and swinging a plastic box with the other. Joe asked, how did he steer his horse? That's what the report said, Wendy sniffed. That's what the campers reported. They was out-of-staters, from Massachusetts to Boston or someplace like that. She said the last part as if it explained away the inconsistency. Which campground? Joe persisted. It says here they were at Crazy Woman Creek. Crazy Woman was the last developed United States Forest Service campground on Bighorn Road, a place generally used as a jumping-off site for hikers and horsepackers entering the mountains. Are you in radio contact with Sheriff Barnum? Joe asked. I believe so. Why don't you give him a call and let him know that the man on horseback was Ode Keatley and that Ode's lying dead in the woodpile behind my house? Joe could hear Wendy gasp, then try to regain her composure. Say again, she replied. Joe hung up the telephone and started for the back door. You're not going back out there? Sheridan whispered. Just for a minute. Joe said in what he hoped was a reassuring tone. He shut the door behind him and walked slowly toward the body of Oak Keatley, his eyes sweeping across the yard, taking in the blood-stained walk, the woodpile, the canyon mouth behind the house. He wanted a clear picture of everything as it was right now before the sheriff and deputies arrived. He didn't want to screw up again. Squatting near the plastic cooler, Joe drew 2 empty envelopes and a pencil from the pocket on his robe. Using the tip of his eraser, Joe flicked several small pieces of scat from the cooler into an envelope. He would send that to headquarters for analysis. He gathered several more pieces of scat and put them in another envelope. He sealed both and put them back in his pocket. He left the rest for the sheriff. Back in the house, Joe dressed in his day-to-day uniform, blue jeans and his red button-up chamois shirt with a Pearl Horn antelope patch on the sleeve. Over the breast pocket was his nameplate, which read Game Warden, and under that J. Pickett. When he came downstairs, the girls were sprawled in front of the snowy television, and Mary Beth was sitting at the table, flanked by dirty dishes. She held a big mug of coffee in her hands and stared at something in the air between them. Her eyes raised until they met Joe's. It'll be okay, Joe said, forcing a smile. He asked Mary Beth to gather up the children some clothes and go into Saddle String. They could check into a motel until this was over and the backyard was cleaned up. He didn't want the kids seeing the dead man. Sheridan's dreams were already vivid enough. Joe, who will pay for the room? Will the state pay for it? Mary Beth asked softly so the children couldn't hear. You mean we can't? Joe replied, incredulous. She shook her head no. Mary Beth kept the meager family budget under a tight rein. It was the end of the month. She would know if they were broke, and apparently that was the case. Joe felt his face flush. Maybe they could stay with somebody? Joe dismissed that. While they had made a few friends in town, they were still new, and he didn't know who they could call to ask this kind of favor. Can we use the credit card? He asked. Nearly maxed out. She said it might work for a night or two, though. He felt another wave of heat wash up his neck. I'm sorry, honey, he mumbled. He found his dusty black hat in his head and went outside to wait.